Well, hi there, and welcome to this reading of Sherlock Holmes, The Adventure of the Sussex Vampire. I'm Nas, I'm a bookworm, and I'd love to know where you're from and what book you are currently reading. Now, when it comes to these Sherlock Holmes books, I have to say, I'm really excited. I'm thrilled. I love it when I find something new to read, when I find an author that I just love. So I'm really excited about the fact that there are 52 short stories that we can cover. Now, I suggest that you grab a cup of tea or coffee. I just had a cappuccino. It's quite cold out here, so you know what? What better way to spend the day than reading Sherlock Holmes? I don't read anything in advance, so what you see is what you get. So get ready for some bloopers, for some mess ups, but you know what? That's all part of reading. So if you're ready, let's dive into the adventure of the Sussex Vampire. And at the moment, I have been doing some readings about Frankenstein, and I was thinking about Dracula, and here we have a monster. Sounds good to me. So let's dive in. Holmes had read carefully a note which the last post had brought him, so it arrived in the post. Then, with a dry chuckle, which was his nearest approach to a laugh, he tossed it over to me. So, Sherlock Holmes is not one of those people who actually laughs. His chuckle was the closest you would ever get to a laugh. So, a chuckle is just like, okay, it's a mini laugh. For a mixture of the modern and the medieval, of the practical and of the wildly fanciful, I think this is surely the limit, said he. What do you make of it, Watson? What do you make of it, Watson? What are your thoughts? I read as follows. 46, Old Jury, November 19th. Vampires, sir, our client, Mr. Robert Ferguson of Ferguson Muirhead Tea Brokers, Mincing Lane, has made some inquiry from us in the communication of even date concerning vampires. As our firm specializes entirely upon the assessment of machinery, the matter hardly comes within our expertise, and we have therefore recommended Mr. Ferguson to call upon you and lay the matter before you. We have not forgotten your successful action in the case of Matilda Briggs. So, word of mouth, reputation, Sherlock Holmes solved the case. He was successful in the case of Matilda Briggs, and that's why he is remembered. This is why he is being recommended. We are, sir, faithfully yours, Morrison, and Dodd, per EJC. Matilda Briggs was not the name of a young woman, Watson, said Holmes in a reminiscent tone. So he's thinking back, reminisce. When you reminisce, you think back in time. It was a ship which is associated with the giant rat of Sumatra, a story for which the world is not yet prepared. But what do we know about vampires? Does it come within our purview either? Are we qualified to deal with this? They're not, but are we? Anything is better than stagnation. Stagnation is staying stuck, not moving. But really, we seem to have been switched on to a Grimm's fairy tale. Growing up, I think native English speakers do read a lot of Grimm's fairy tales, and if you have, hit that like button. Make a long arm, Watson, and see what V has to say. I have no idea what's going on here, but I leaned back and took down the great indexed volume to which he referred. Okay, so V is obviously some kind of encyclopedia or index. Holmes balanced it on his knee, and his eyes moved slowly and lovingly over the record of old cases, mixed with the accumulated information of a lifetime. Voyage of the Glorious Scott, he read. That was a bad business. I have some recollection that you made a record of it, Watson, though I was unable to congratulate you upon the result. Victor Lynch, the forger. Venomous lizard or Gila. Remarkable case, that. Victoria, the circus belle, Vanderbilt and the Yeggman, Vipers, Vigor, the Hammersmith Wonder. Hello, hello. Good old index. You can't beat it. Listen to this, Watson. Vampirism in Hungary. And again, vampires in Transylvania. He threw over the pages with eagerness. So he's flipping through this book that's a record of all of his cases. He turned over the pages with eagerness. But after a short, intent perusal, he threw down the great book with a snarl of disappointment. So then he stopped, he looked at something really intently, and then he threw down the book, and clearly disappointed. I wonder why. Rubbish, Watson, rubbish. What have we to do with walking corpses who can only be held in their grave by stakes driven through their hearts? It's pure lunacy. So here we're talking about the vampires. These are walking corpses. They're the walking dead. And they can only be trapped, contained in their graves when a stake, like a spear, a metal rod, is driven through their hearts. It's pure lunacy. But surely, said I, the vampire was not necessarily a living man. Oh, sorry, not necessarily a dead man. A living person might have the habit, I have read, for example, of the old sucking the blood of the young in order to retain their youth. And that's the heart of vampirism, isn't it? Wanting eternal youth. Okay. You are right, Watson. It mentions the legend in one of these references. But are we to give serious attention to such things? This agency stands flat-footed upon the ground, and there it must remain. The world is big enough for us. No ghosts need apply. I fear that we cannot take Mr. Ferguson very seriously. Possibly this note may be from him and may throw some light upon what is worrying him. So, this is not real. Are we supposed to be serious about this? Take this seriously? Really give it our attention? We're the kind of agency that is very pragmatic, very realistic. We have our feet on the ground. And we have enough work in this world. It's big enough for us. We really don't need to mess with ghosts. So he took up a second letter which had lain unnoticed upon the table while he had been absorbed with the first. This he began to read with a smile of amusement upon his face, which gradually faded away into an expression of intense interest and concentration. When he had finished, he sat for some little time, lost in thought, with the letter dangling from his fingers. Finally, with a start, he aroused himself from his reverie. So he started reading the letter. He was amused, but then the amusement faded, and he became quite intense and concentrated. And then he sat for a little while, lost in thought, thinking about this, and the letter was dangling from his fingers. And then suddenly he pulled forward. He aroused himself from the reverie. Cheeseman's Lamberley. Where is Lamberley, Watson? It is in Sussex, south of Horsham. Not very far, ah? And Cheeseman's? I know that country, Holmes. It is full of old houses which are named after the men who built them centuries ago. You get Audleys and Harveys and Carretons. The folk are forgotten, but their names live in their houses. Precisely, said Holmes coldly. It was one of the peculiarities of his proud, self-contained nature that though he docketed any fresh information very quietly and accurately in his brain, he seldom made any acknowledgement to the giver. So, what I'm going to say here is this is a guy who plays his cards close to his chest. He doesn't let on what he's thinking. So, he comes to a realization, but he keeps it to himself. All this new information, he just keeps it in his brain. He doesn't share. Like I said, he plays his cards close to his chest. And this is, of course, a gambling idiom. I rather fancy we shall know a good deal more about Cheeseman's Lamberley before we are through. The letter is, as I had hoped, from Robert Ferguson. By the way, he claims acquaintance with you. He says that he knows you. With me? You had better read it. He handed the letter across. It was headed with the address quoted, Dear Mr. Holmes. It said, I have been recommended to you by my lawyers, but indeed the matter is so extraordinarily delicate that it is most difficult to discuss. It concerns a friend for whom I am acting, so I'm acting on behalf of someone else. This gentleman married some 5 years ago a Peruvian lady, the daughter of a Peruvian merchant, whom he had met in connection with the importation of nitrates. So these were businessmen, traders. The lady was very beautiful, but the fact of her foreign birth and of her alien religion always caused a separation of interests and of feelings between husband and wife. So there was some kind of discord and issue between them because of her foreign birth, also her different religion, her alien religion, so that after a time his love may have cooled towards her, and he may have come to regard their union as a mistake. So he regretted marrying her, but not immediately. It took some time. He felt there were sides of her character which he could never explore or understand. This was the more painful as she was as loving a wife as a man could have, to all appearance, absolutely devoted. So this was really sad because she was a great wife. Now for the point which I will make more plain when we meet. Indeed, the note is merely to give you a general idea of the situation and to ascertain whether you would care to interest yourself in the matter. So this is just kind of like we would say a brief, just some information, and also for you to think about whether you really want to get involved in this. The lady began to show some curious traits quite alien to her ordinarily sweet and gentle disposition. So she was someone who was quite calm, quite kind, quite nice, quite gentle, very sweet, but some things changed. The gentleman had been married twice, and he had one son by the first wife. This boy was now 15, a very charming and affectionate youth, though unhappily injured through an accident in childhood. So he had an accident, and clearly it was an injury that he sustained, and it was long term. Twice, the wife was caught in the act of assaulting this poor lad in the most unprovoked way. Once she hit him with a stick and left a great weal on his arm. All right, so more than a bruise, like a welt. This was a smaller matter, however, compared with her conduct to her own child, a dear boy just under 1 year of age. On one occasion about a month ago, this child had been left by its nurse for a few minutes. A loud cry from the baby, as of pain, pulled the nurse back. As she ran into the room, she saw her employer, the lady, leaning over the baby and apparently biting his neck. There was a small wound in the neck, from which a stream of blood had escaped. The nurse was so horrified that she wished to call the husband, But the lady implored her not to do so, and actually gave her £5 as a price for her silence. So she bribed her into silence. No explanation was ever given. And for the moment, the matter was passed over, so it was ignored, they let it go. It left, however, a terrible impression upon the nurse's mind, and from that time she began to watch her mistress closely and to keep a closer guard upon the baby whom she tenderly loved. It seemed to her that even as she watched the mother, so the mother watched her, and that every time she was compelled to leave the baby alone, the mother was waiting to get at it. Day and night, the nurse covered the child, and day and night, the silent, watchful mother seemed to be lying in wait as a wolf waits for a lamb. It must read most incredible to you, and yet I beg you to take it seriously, for a child's life and a man's sanity may depend upon it. At last, there came one dreadful day when the facts could no longer be concealed from the husband. The nurse's nerve had given way. She could stand the strain no longer, and she made a clean breast of it all to the man. So the nurse then confessed to the husband what was going on. She made a clean breast of it all. She told him the truth. To him, it seemed as wild a tale as it may now seem to you. He knew his wife to be a loving wife, and save for the assaults upon her stepson, so except for the assaults upon her stepson, she was a loving mother. Why then would she wound her own dear little baby? He told the nurse that she was dreaming, that her suspicions were those of a lunatic, and that such libels upon her mistress were not to be tolerated. So libel, accusation. So you may have heard this as a legal term, libel. While they were talking, a sudden cry of pain was heard. Nurse and master rushed together to the nursery. Imagine his feelings, Mr. Holmes, as he saw his wife rise from a kneeling position beside the cot and saw blood upon the child's exposed neck and upon the sheet. With a cry of horror, he turned his wife's face to the light and saw blood all round her lips. It was she beyond all question, who had drunk the poor baby's blood. So there was no doubt, there was no question about it. She was the one who had drunk the poor baby's blood. So the matter stands. She is now confined to her room. There has been no explanation. The husband is half demented. He's going crazy. He knows, and I know, little of vampirism beyond the name. We had thought it some wild tale of foreign parts, like Romania, about Dracula and so on. And yet here, in the very heart of the English Sussex, well, all this can be discussed with you in the morning. Will you see me? Will you use your great powers in aiding a distracted man? If so, kindly wire to Ferguson, Cheeseman's, Lamberley, and I will be at your rooms by 10 o'clock. Yours faithfully, Robert Ferguson. P.S. I believe your friend Watson played rugby for Blackheath when I was 3/4 for Richmond. It is the only personal introduction which I can give. Ah, of course I remembered him, said I as I laid down the letter. Big Bob Ferguson, the finest 3/4 Richmond ever had. He was always a good-natured chap. It's like him to be so concerned over a friend's case. Holmes looked at me thoughtfully and shook his head. I never get your limits, Watson, said he. There are unexplored possibilities about you. Take a wire down like a good fellow. We'll examine your case with pleasure. So a wire is kind of a telegram. It's a message. Your case? We must not let him think that this agency is a home for the weak-minded. Of course it is his case. Send him that wire and let the matter rest till morning. So send him that message. We're taking on the case. Promptly at 10 o'clock next morning, Ferguson strode into our room. I had remembered him as a long, slab-sided man with loose limbs and a fine turn of speed, which had carried him round many an opposing back. So he was an athlete and he was quick, fine turn of speed. Basically, he was Usain Bolt in rugby. There is surely nothing in life more painful than to meet the wreck of a fine athlete whom one has known in his prime. And this is interesting. When you see someone who was a great athlete and then you see them later in life and they don't have that remarkable physique, that strength, it's kind of disappointing. Not just with athletes, but also, movie stars. People age. We forget that sometimes. People age. So he's no longer in his prime. He's no longer at his best. His great frame had fallen in. His flaxen hair was scanty, and his shoulders were bowed. He's no longer this great, strapping athlete in his prime. I fear that I had roused corresponding emotions in him. So when he looked at me, I got the feeling that he thought the same about me. I wasn't this great rugby player any longer. Hello, Watson, said he, and his voice was still deep and hearty. You don't look quite the man you did when I threw you over the ropes into the crowd at the old deer park. I expect I have changed a bit also, but it's this last day or two that has aged me. I see by your telegram, Mr. Holmes, that it is no use my pretending to be anyone's deputy. So when Holmes said his case, your case, Holmes knew that he wasn't acting on behalf of someone else. He was doing it for himself. So he says to Holmes, well, I suppose the time for pretending is over. I'm not someone's deputy. I'm not going to pretend any longer. And he also addresses Watson and says, hey, mate, we've both changed a lot, haven't we? Right. So Holmes says it is simpler to deal direct. Of course it is. But you can imagine how difficult it is when you are speaking of the one woman whom you are bound to protect and help. What can I do? How am I to go to the police with such a story? And yet the kiddies have got to be protected. Is it madness, Mr. Holmes? Is it something in the blood? Have you any similar case in your experience? For God's sake, give me some advice, for I am at my wits' end. I am going crazy. I'm at my wits' end. I have no more thoughts, ideas, solutions. I'm desperate. I'm at my wits' end. Very naturally, Mr. Ferguson. Now sit here and pull yourself together and give me a few clear answers. Okay, man, straighten up now. Pull yourself together. Focus, focus. And I need some answers from you. I can assure you that I am very far from being at my wits' end. I'm not confused. I'm not distracted. I'm totally focused. And that I am confident we shall find some solution. First of all, tell me what steps you have taken. Is your wife still near the children? We had a dreadful scene. She is a most loving woman, Mr. Holmes. If ever a woman loved a man with all her heart and soul, she loves me. She was cut to the heart broken, that I should have discovered this horrible, this incredible secret. She would not even speak. She gave no answer to my reproaches, save to gaze at me with a sort of wild, despairing look in her eyes. Then she rushed to her room and locked herself in. Since then, she has refused to see me. She has a maid who was with her before her marriage, Dolores by name, a friend rather than a servant. She takes her food to her. So she was heartbroken that I found out she could not even speak. I accused her, I confronted her, and she said nothing. She just gazed at me with eyes that were wild, filled with despair. Then she rushed to her room. She locked herself in, and she has refused to see me. And then she has this maid, Dolores, who has been with her pretty much all her life before her marriage, who takes her food to her. Then the child is in no immediate danger. Mrs. Mason, the nurse, has sworn that she will not leave it night or day. I can absolutely trust her. I am more uneasy about poor little Jack, for as I told you in my note, he has twice been assaulted by her. So the children are not in immediate danger. The nurse is watching over the baby, but the father is a little concerned about Jack because his stepmother has assaulted him twice, but never wounded. No, she struck him savagely. It is the more terrible as he is a poor little inoffensive cripple. So if you remember, there was some kind of accident in his youth, right? And so he has some kind of disability, deformity. He refers to him as a cripple. Ferguson's gaunt features softened as he spoke of his boy. You would think that the dear lad's condition would soften anyone's heart, a fall in childhood and a twisted spine, Mr. Holmes, but the dearest, most loving heart within. Now, for me, I'm just wondering, what was this fall about? How did this child fall? Holmes had picked up the letter of yesterday and was reading it over. What other inmates are there in your house, Mr. Ferguson? So, who else lives in your house? Two servants who have not been long with us, one stable hand, Michael, who sleeps in the house, my wife, myself, my boy Jack, baby Dolores, and Mrs. Mason. That is all. I gathered that you did not know your wife well at the time of your marriage. I had only known her a few weeks. And then we have this English phrase, marry in haste, repent at leisure. This is all very interesting. I wonder why the urgency to get married before she even knew her. Okay, and how long had this maid Dolores been with her? Some years. Then your wife's character would really be better known by Dolores than by you. Yes, you may say so. Holmes made a note. I fancy, said he, that I may be of more use at Lamberley than here. It is eminently a case for personal investigation. If the lady remains in her room, our presence could not annoy or inconvenience her. Of course, we would stay at the inn. Ferguson gave a gesture of relief. It is what I hoped, Mr. Holmes. There is an excellent train at 2 from Victoria if you could come. So Sherlock Holmes basically says he's taking on the case and they're going to go to Lamberley. It needs personal investigation and they won't be annoying the mother. She'll be in her room, she'll be locked up, so they're not going to agitate her in any way. Of course we could come. There is a lull at present. We're not very busy at the moment. I can give you my undivided energies. Watson, of course, comes with us, but there are one or two points upon which I wish to be very sure before I start. This unhappy lady, as I understand, has appeared to assault both the children, her own baby and your little son. So we're going to come, both myself and Watson, but I need to clarify some things before I start. This unhappy lady, your wife, has assaulted both children, right? So the little baby and your son from the previous marriage. That is so. And but the assaults take different forms, do they not? She has beaten your son. So very different types of assault. One is quite vampirish. The other just seems to be an assault. Nothing great, nothing good about an assault, but very different, right? Once with a stick and once very savagely with her hands. Did she give no explanation why she struck him? None, save that she hated him. Save is except. None except that she hated him. And again she said so. Well, that is not unknown among stepmothers. A posthumous jealousy, I will say. Is the lady jealous by nature? So he's saying, look, it's not unusual for stepmothers to hate their stepchildren. And he wants to know if she's a very jealous person. Yes, she is very jealous. Jealous with all the strength of her fiery tropical love. Remember, she's from Peru. She's Peruvian. And he says this is part of her character, her nature. But the boy, he is 15, I understand, and probably very developed in mind since his body has been circumscribed in action. Did he give you no explanation of these assaults? So, okay, this boy is a cripple, but his mind is developed, right? Um, didn't he explain these assaults to you? No, he declared there was no reason. Were they good friends at other times? No, there was never any love between them. Yet you say he is affectionate. Never in the world could there be so devoted a son. My life is his life. He is absorbed in what I say or do. Once again, Holmes made a note. For some time he sat lost in thought. No doubt you and the boy were great comrades before the second marriage. You were thrown very close together, were you not? So before this new wife came into the picture, you and your son were very close. Very much so. And the boy, having so affectionate a nature, was devoted, no doubt, to the memory of his mother. Hmm, interesting train of thought here. Most devoted. He would certainly seem to be a most interesting lad. There is one other point about these assaults. Were the strange attacks upon the baby and the assaults upon Yao's son at the same period? So did these attacks happen at the same time? In the first case, it was so. It was as if some frenzy had seized her and she had vented her rage upon both children. In the second case, it was only Jack who suffered. Mrs. Mason had no complaint to make about the baby. That certainly complicates matters. I don't quite follow you, Mr. Holmes. Possibly not. One forms provisional theories and waits for time or fuller knowledge to explode them. A bad habit, Mr. Ferguson, but human nature is weak. I fear that your old friend here has given an exaggerated view of my scientific methods. However, I will only say at the present stage that your problem does not appear to me to be insoluble, but that you may expect to find us at Victoria at 2 o'clock. So I think I can solve this case, but it's not all scientific. Anyway, we will be on the train. We will be at Victoria Station at 2 o'clock. It was evening of a dull, foggy November day when, having left our bags at the Chequers, Lamberley, we drove through the Sussex clay of a long, winding lane and finally reached the isolated and ancient farmhouse in which Ferguson dwelt. Dwelt, lived. Dwell, live. Dwelling, house. It was a large, straggling building, very old in the center, very new at the wings, with towering Tudor chimneys and a lichen-spotted, high-pitched roof of Horsham slabs. So it was this large building, old in the center, that's the original building, and new wings on either side, and towering Tudor chimneys, and so on. The doorsteps were worn into curves, and the ancient tiles which lined the porch were marked with the rebus of a cheese and a man after the original builder. Within the ceilings were corrugated with heavy oaken beams, and the uneven floors sagged into sharp curves. An odor of age and decay pervaded the whole crumbling building. This is just a description of this home. It's old. The middle section is the original. There have been extensions on either side. There was one very large central room into which Ferguson led us. Here, in a huge old-fashioned fireplace with an iron screen behind it dated 1670, there blazed and spluttered a splendid log fire. The room, as I gazed round, was a most singular mixture of dates and of places. So it's a collection of things from different times and different places. The half-paneled walls may well have belonged to the original yeoman farmer of the 17th century. They were ornamented, however, on the lower part by a line of well-chosen modern watercolors. So this juxtaposition of old and new, while above, where yellow plaster took the place of oak, there was hung a fine collection of South American utensils and weapons, which had been brought, no doubt, by the Peruvian lady upstairs. It almost feels like a quilt, a mix and match, a mishmash. Mishmash. Is that correct? Like a quilt, a patchwork quilt where you've got all these different things side by side and connecting. Holmes rose with that quick curiosity which sprang from his eager mind and examined them with some care. He returned with his eyes full of thought. So he's observing this room, and it was this mixture, this patchwork quilt almost of different things, modern watercolors, Peruvian art, utensils, weapons. Hello, he cried, hello. A spaniel had lain in a basket in the corner. It came slowly forward towards its master, walking with difficulty. Its hind legs moved irregularly, and its tail was on the ground. It licked Ferguson's hand. What is it, Mr. Holmes? The dog. What's the matter with it? That's what puzzled the vet. A sort of paralysis, spinal meningitis, he thought. But it is passing. He'll be all right soon, won't you, Carlo? A shiver of assent passed through the drooping tail, so the tail kind of quivered. Okay. The dog's mournful eyes passed from one of us to the other, so the dog looked from one to the other. He scanned us. He knew that we were discussing his case. Did it come on suddenly? In a single night? How long ago? It may have been 4 months ago. Very remarkable, very suggestive. What do you see in it, Mr. Holmes? A confirmation of what I had already thought. For God's sake, what do you think, Mr. Holmes? It may be a mere intellectual puzzle to you, but it is life and death to me. My wife a would-be murderer, my child in constant danger. Don't play with me, Mr. Holmes. It is too terribly serious. The big rugby three-quarter, this athlete, was trembling all over. Holmes put his hand soothingly upon his arm. I fear that there is pain for you, Mr. Ferguson, whatever the solution may be, said he. I would spare you all I can. I cannot say more for the instant, but before I leave this house, I hope I may have something definite. So Ferguson, this once big, strapping rugby player, is now distraught. He is trembling, and his words, the agitation, he says to Holmes, this may just be a case to you, a puzzle, but for me, it's real life. Don't play with me. I need answers. And Holmes assures him that he will have answers before he leaves. Please, God, you may. If you will excuse me, gentlemen, I will go up to my wife's room and see if there has been any change. He was away some minutes, during which Holmes resumed his examination of the curiosities upon the wall. When our host returned, it was clear from his downcast face that he had made no progress. He brought with him a tall, slim, brown-faced girl. The tea's ready, Dolores, said Ferguson. See that your mistress has everything she can wish. She vera ill, cried the girl, looking with indignant eyes at her master. She no ask for food, she vera ill, she need doctor. I frightened stay alone with her without doctor. So she is Peruvian, her English is quite basic, but she is very agitated. Ferguson looked at me with a question in his eyes. I should be so glad if I could be of use. So Watson is a doctor. Would your mistress see Dr. Watson? I take him. I no ask leave. She needs a doctor. So I'm not even going to ask her for permission. Then I'll come with you at once. I followed the girl, who was quivering with strong emotion, up the staircase and down an ancient corridor. At the end was an iron-clamped and massive door. It struck me as I looked at it that if Ferguson tried to force his way to his wife, he would find it no easy matter, so she was almost barricaded in. The girl drew a key from her pocket, and the heavy oaken planks creaked upon their old hinges. I passed in, and she swiftly followed, fastening the door behind her. On the bed, a woman was lying, who was clearly in a high fever. She was only half conscious, but as I entered, she raised a pair of frightened but beautiful eyes and glared at me in apprehension. Seeing a stranger, she appeared to be relieved and sank back with a sigh upon the pillow. She is clearly not well, and she seems to be barricaded in this room, locked in, and Dolores has the key. I stepped up to her. I got closer with a few reassuring words, and she lay still while I took her pulse and her temperature. So he does this little medical check. Both were high, and yet my impression was that the condition was rather that of mental and nervous excitement than of any actual seizure. Something strange is going on here. So it seems like there's something wrong or going on with her mind. She lie like that 1 day, 2 day. I afraid she die, said the girl. The woman turned her flushed and handsome face towards me. Handsome face, beautiful face. Where is my husband? He is below and would wish to see you. I will not see him. I will not see him. Then she seemed to wander off into delirium. A fiend, a fiend. Oh, what shall I do with this devil? Who is she talking about? The husband? Can I help you in any way? No, no one can help you. It is finished. All is destroyed. Do what I will. All is destroyed. What is she referring to here? Her marriage, her reputation, her life? The woman must have some strange delusion. I could not see honest Bob Ferguson in the character of a fiend or a devil, an evil person. Madame, I said, your husband loves you dearly. He is deeply grieved at this happening. Again, she turned on me those glorious eyes, those beautiful eyes. He loves me, yes, but do I not love him? Do I not love him even to sacrifice myself rather than break his dear heart? That is how I love him. And yet he could think of me, he could speak of me so. So she's very hurt by him, disappointed in him. He's let her down. He is full of grief, but he cannot understand. No, he cannot understand, but he should trust. He should know better. He should know me better. Will you not see him? I suggested. No, no, I cannot forget those terrible words, nor the look upon his face. I will not see him. Go now, you can do nothing for me. So she feels very betrayed by him. His terrible words, the way he looked at her. Tell him only one thing. I want my child. I have a right to my child. That is the only message I can send him. She turned her face to the wall and would say no more. I returned to the room downstairs, where Ferguson and Holmes still sat by the fire. Ferguson listened moodily to my account of the interview. How can I send her the child? He said. How do I know what strange impulse might come upon her? How can I ever forget how she rose from beside it, with its blood upon her lips? He shuddered at the recollection. The child is safe with Mrs. Mason, and there he must remain. No, 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 I am not letting her have the child. No, that image of her over the child, raising herself, and then the blood of the child on her lips. No, no, I cannot do this. The child is safe with Mrs. Mason. A smart maid, the only modern thing which we had seen in the house, had brought in some tea. As she was serving it, the door opened and a youth entered the room. He was a remarkable lad, pale-faced and fair-haired, with excitable light blue eyes, which blazed into a sudden flame of emotion and joy as they rested upon his father. He rushed forward and threw his arms round his neck with the abandon of a loving girl. So the maid comes in, and then followed by the son, and his beautiful, remarkable, pale-faced, fair hair, beautiful blue eyes, excitable blue eyes, and he rushes in and he hugs his father with great love, almost the way a daughter would. "Oh, Daddy," he cried, "I did not know that you were due yet. I should have been here to meet you. Oh, I am so glad to see you." It feels a little over the top to me. I mean, a child loves their father, but isn't this a bit exaggerated? I don't know. Ferguson gently disengaged himself from the embrace with some little show of embarrassment. He seems a little bit embarrassed by this effusive display. Okay, it is over the top. Dear old chap, he said, patting the flaxen head with a very tender hand. I came early because my friends, Mr. Holmes and Dr. Watson, have been persuaded to come down and spend an evening with us. Is that Mr. Holmes, the detective? Yes. The youth looked at us with a very penetrating and, as it seemed to me, unfriendly gaze. This child, who is always so loving, so kind, according to his father, so effusive in his behavior, is suddenly very distant, cold, unfriendly. What about your other child, Mr. Ferguson? Asked Holmes. Might we make the acquaintance of the baby? We'd like to see the baby. Ask Mrs. Mason to bring baby down, said Ferguson. The boy went off with a curious, shambling gait, which told my surgical eyes that he was suffering from a weak spine. So the boy goes away, and he's got this strange walk. Gait is the way in which you walk. So it's shambling gait. And Watson, the doctor, the surgical eyes, realized that he was suffering from a weak spine. Presently, soon, he returned, and behind him came a tall, gaunt woman, thin, bearing in her arms a very beautiful child, dark-eyed, golden-haired, a wonderful mixture of the Saxon and the Latin. Ferguson was evidently devoted to it, for he took it into his arms and fondled it most tenderly. Beautiful sight, father and child. Fancy anyone having the heart to hurt him, he muttered, as he glanced down at the small, angry red pucker upon the cherub throat. So he looks at the wound that the mother allegedly made. Cherub is an angel. A cherub is an angel. So what a beautiful image. This child that has dark eyes and beautiful golden hair, a mixture of the two races or nationalities of the parents, the best of both. And he looks like a little cherub, like a little angel, but then there's this wound, the scar on his neck. It was at this moment that I chanced to glance at Holmes. I happened to look at Holmes and saw a most singular intentness in his expression. His face was as set as if it had been carved out of old ivory, and his eyes, which had glanced for a moment at father and child, were now fixed with eager curiosity upon something at the other side of the room. I happened to look at Holmes, and he was as still as a statue, as if he had been carved out of old ivory. And his eyes, which had glanced from father to son, were now focused on something at the other side of the room. Following his gaze, I could only guess that he was looking out through the window at the melancholy, dripping garden. It is true that a shutter had half closed outside and obstructed his view, but nonetheless, it was certainly at the window that Holmes was fixing his concentrated attention. So he was staring at something in the direction of the window, and even though the shutters were half closed, he was clearly staring at the windows or something outside. Then he smiled, and his eyes came back to the baby, so he looked at the baby once again. On its chubby neck there was the small puckered mark. Without speaking, Holmes examined it with care. Finally, he shook one of the dimple fists, which waved in front of him. So these little hands, oh my gosh, I love baby hands and baby feet. And the baby is shaking his little dimple fists, and then Holmes shakes the baby's hand. Goodbye, little man. You have made a strange start in life. Nurse, I should wish to have a word with you in private. He took her aside and spoke earnestly for a few minutes. I only heard the last words, which were, "Your anxiety will soon, I hope, be set at rest." The woman, who seemed to be a sour, silent kind of creature, withdrew with the child. All right, strange choice for a nanny, right? A silent creature. Sour. What is Mrs. Mason like? Asked Holmes. Not very prepossessing externally. She's not very outwardly loving or given to emotion, but as you can see, okay, she's sour, she's dour, she's silent, but a heart of gold and devoted to the child. Mm. Do you like her, Jack? Holmes turned suddenly upon the boy. His expressive, mobile face shadowed over, and he shook his head. Jack has very strong likes and dislikes, said Ferguson, putting his arm round the boy. Luckily, I am one of his likes. So the father speaks for the child and says, well, Jackie, and he has this nickname for the child. Jack calls him Jackie. Jackie either likes people or dislikes them. I'm lucky that he likes me. The baby cooed and nestled his head upon his father's breast. Ferguson gently disengaged him. "Run away, little Jackie," said he, and he watched his son with loving eyes until he disappeared. "Now, Mr. Holmes," he continued when the boy was gone, "I really feel that I have brought you on a fool's errand. For what can you possibly do, save give me your sympathy? It must be an exceedingly delicate and complex affair from your point of view. So, Mr. Holmes, you've seen the situation. I think all you can offer me is sympathy. I don't think you really have the answer to my problems, because this is such a delicate and complex situation, is it not?" "It is certainly delicate," said my friend, with an amused smile. "But I have not been struck up to now with its complexity. It has been a case for intellectual deduction. But when this original intellectual deduction is confirmed point by quite a number of independent incidents, then the subjective becomes objective, and we can say confidently that we have reached our goal. I had in fact reached it before we left Baker Street, and the rest has merely been observation and confirmation. So I already knew the answers before I got here, but I needed to confirm my suspicions. I needed to prove my theory, my hypothesis." Ferguson put his big hand, of course he's this rugby player, ex-rugby player, to his furrowed forehead. "For heaven's sake, Holmes," he said hoarsely, "if you can see the truth in this matter, do not keep me in suspense. How do I stand? What shall I do? I care nothing as to how you have found your facts, so long as you have really got them. I don't need to know the details, the intricacies, the research or the analysis. I just want answers. Certainly, I owe you an explanation, and you shall have it. But you will permit me to handle the matter in my own way. Is the lady capable of seeing us, Watson? She is ill, but she is quite rational. So yes, very good. It is only in her presence that we can clear the matter up. Let us go up to her." "She will not see me," cried Ferguson. "Oh, yes, she will," said Holmes. He scribbled a few lines upon a sheet of paper. "You at least have the entree, Watson. Will you have the goodness to give the lady this note?" So the husband is saying, she won't see me. There's no point in me going up. But then Sherlock writes this note for her and tells Watson to go up and give the note to her. So there's something in the note that's going to change her mind and make her agree to see the husband. Okay. I ascended again and handed the note to Dolores, who cautiously opened the door. A minute later, I heard a cry from within, a cry in which joy and surprise seemed to be blended. Dolores looked out. "She will see them, she will listen," said she. What a beautiful accent. I love accented English, don't you? At my summons, Ferguson and Holmes came up. As we entered the room, Ferguson took a step or two towards his wife, who had raised herself in the bed, but she held out her hand to repulse him. So Ferguson tries to go to his wife, and she is like, "No, no." She holds out her hand. Um, he sank into an armchair, which Holmes seated himself beside her. While Holmes seated himself beside her, after bowing to the lady, who looked at him with wide-eyed amazement. "I think we can dispense with Dolores," said Holmes. "Oh, very well, madame. If you would rather she stayed, I can see no objection. Now, Mr. Ferguson, I am a busy man with many calls, and my methods have to be short and direct. The swiftest surgery is the least painful, so the faster we do this, the better. And it's surgery because it's going to cut. It's going to hurt, but the faster we do it, the less painful it will be. Let me first say what will ease your mind. Your wife is a very good, a very loving, and a very ill-used woman." Ferguson sat up with a cry of joy. He really wants this to be true. "Prove that, Mr. Holmes, and I am your debtor forever. I will forever be in your debt. I will owe you. I will do so, but in doing so, I must wound you deeply in another direction. I care nothing so long as you clear my wife. Everything on earth is insignificant compared to that." So Holmes says to him, "Look, I am going to prove it. And by proving it, I'm actually going to hurt you in another way." And he says, "I don't care as long as you clear my wife. Nothing else matters. Everything on earth is insignificant compared to that." Let me tell you then the train of reasoning which passed through my mind in Baker Street. The idea of a vampire was to me absurd. I never believed in this vampire theory. Such things do not happen in criminal practice in England. And yet, your observation was precise. You had seen the lady rise from beside the child's cot with blood upon her lips. We can't dispute that, but I still did not and do not believe in vampires not here. I did. Did it not occur to you that a bleeding wound may be sucked for some other purpose than to draw the blood from it? Was there not a queen in English history who sucked such a wound to draw poison from it? And if you think about it, what do they say about a snake bite? If a snake bites you, suck on it, draw out the poison. If a bee stings you, isn't it important to get the sting out? Wow, what a deduction. We're not done. Poison? A South American household. My instinct felt the presence of those weapons upon the wall before my eyes ever saw them. So the moment you said the South American Peruvian household, I imagined a home filled with these items, maybe. Before I even saw them, I imagined that you would have these things. It might have been other poison, but that was what occurred to me. When I saw that little empty quiver beside the small bird bow, it was just what I expected to see. If a child were pricked with one of those arrows dipped in curare or some other devilish drug, it would mean death if the venom were not sucked out. It's getting interesting. And the dog. If one were to use such a poison, would one not try it first in order to see that it had not lost its power. I did not foresee the dog. I had no idea about the dog, but wouldn't you test it on an animal first? But at least I understand him, and he fitted into my reconstruction. Now, do you understand? Your wife feared such an attack. She saw it made and saved the child's life. And yet she shrank from telling you all the truth, for she knew how you loved the boy and feared lest it break your heart. So your wife knew, she expected the attack, but she shrank from telling you. She did not tell you. She shrank from doing it. She was reluctant to do it because she knows how you love the boy. Jackie, I watched him as you fondled the baby, the child just now. His face was clearly reflected in the glass of the window where the shutter formed a background. So he wasn't looking outside, he was looking at the reflection. I saw such jealousy, such cruel hatred as I have seldom seen in a human face. My Jackie? You have to face it, Mr. Ferguson. It is the more painful because it is a distorted love, a maniacal, exaggerated love for you. Isn't this what I said when the child came in and hugged his father? I said it was over the top. And like I said, I read the story for the first time with you guys. So my reaction is just a very real reaction. Okay. A maniacal, exaggerated love for you and possibly for his dead mother, which has prompted his action. It's why he did this. His very soul is consumed with hatred for the splendid child whose health and beauty are a contrast to his own weakness. That's sad. He's crippled, he's deformed, and then you've got this beautiful, beautiful, perfect child. And that actually highlights that contrast makes his weakness even weaker. It makes it even worse. Good God, it is incredible. Have I spoken the truth, madame? The lady was sobbing with her face buried in the pillows. Now she turned to her husband. How could I tell you, Bob? I felt the blow it would be to you. It was better that I should wait and that it should come from some other lips than mine. I couldn't tell you. I couldn't hurt you. I knew how broken, heartbroken you would be. I knew how much it would hurt you. So I decided to wait, let someone else tell you. When this gentleman, who seems to have powers of magic, wrote that he knew all, I was glad. I think a year at sea would be my prescription for Master Jackie, said Holmes, rising from his chair. We need to send him away. Only one thing is still clouded, madame. We can quite understand your attacks upon Master Jackie. Yeah, you were beating him because he was trying to kill your child. There is a limit to a mother's patience. But how did you dare to leave the child these last 2 days? Because wouldn't he have tried again? I had told Mrs. Mason. She knew. Exactly, so I imagined. Ferguson was standing by the bed, choking, his hands outstretched and quivering. This, I fancy, is the time for our exit, Watson, said Holmes in a whisper. We need to leave them alone. If you will take one elbow off the too faithful Dolores, I will take the other. We have to drag Dolores out. These two need to be alone. There now, he added as he closed the door behind him. I think we may leave them to settle the rest among themselves. I have only one further note on this case. It is the letter which Holmes wrote in final answer to that with which the narrative begins. It ran thus. November 21st, regarding vampires, re-vampires. Sir, referring to your letter on the 19th, I beg to state that I have looked into the inquiry of your client, Mr. Robert Ferguson, of Ferguson and Muirhead, tea brokers of Mincing Lane, and that the matter has been brought to a satisfactory conclusion. With thanks for your recommendation, I am, sir, faithfully yours, Sherlock Holmes. And this is Sherlock Holmes being his witty, sarcastic self, because he's writing to Ferguson, who he knew all along was the husband and not some interested third party who was trying to get this resolved. So Sherlock Holmes being quintessentially Sherlock Holmes, sense of humor, a bit of sarcasm thrown in. And basically, if you enjoyed this reading, if you are having fun with me on this short story series, please do take a moment to like and subscribe. I'm Nas, I'm a bookworm, and this one has been fun, hasn't it? Ciao.